Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The desert stretched out in all directions, endless waves of sand, bleached white under the brutal sun. Captain Elena Greer stood at the edge of the ridge, visor down, shielding her eyes from the fierce winds that carried tiny razor-sharp grains of dust. Xanthus, the abandoned world, no life, no water, no chance for colonization, yet here they were. She squinted into the horizon, watching as the last shuttle disappeared from view, leaving her and her team behind to explore the surface. The planet had been classified as dead for decades, but new data suggested there was something worth investigating. The higher-ups back on Earth had made their orders clear. Find out what's out there. Alina, a voice crackled in her earpiece, snapping her from her thought. Dr. Marcus Heller saw a voice, of course, impatient, eager, and filled with the excitement that only a scientist could muster in such desolation. You were going to want to see this. She sighed, her instincts gnawing at her gut. Heller had been on edge since they arrived, jittery, with excitement, and that always made her nervous. As the team leader, her job was to keep things in check, not let the enthusiasm of discovery override their safety protocol. With a glance at the sandy expanse, she turned and made her way down the ridge. Heller was bent over the small scanner in front of him, its light blinking steadily. Around him, the rest of the crew, Jacob, the security officer, Sarah, the young mechanic, and the other specialists milled about, unpacking gear and setting up their base camp. As Alina approached, she could see Heller's fingers tapping excitedly on the side of the scanner. "What is it, Heller?" she asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of her voice. She wasn't in the mood for wild goose chases. "He didn't look up. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. I need you to see it for yourself." He held out a small vial of dust, so fine it shimmered in the fading sunlight. "I think I found something." Elena crossed her arms. "Dust, Heller, the whole planet is made of it." He looked up at her, his eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Not just dust, life." Her heart skipped a beat. "Life in this wasteland." "Look closer," he said, offering her the scanner. "Under the surface, beneath all this sand, there is something alive. The readings are off the charts, unlike anything I've ever seen." She leaned over the scanner, watching the data scroll by. At first, it was hard to make sense of just numbers and read out. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw it, a pulse, something moving, something living beneath the sand. It was faint, almost undetectable, but it was there, alive. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Heller admitted, "but I'm going to find out." By the time the second sun had set, the team had excavated a small area around their camp. The sand, once seemingly endless, had begun to give way to something deeper, something almost crystalline beneath the surface. It was hard to see, but it glimmered faintly in the light of their headlamp. Heller was crouched low, running his fingers through the strange material.
"It's like nothing I've ever seen." Remember? His voice reverent. "It's so beautiful."
Alina knelt beside him, her curiosity getting the better of her. She could see it too now, the way the sand seemed to shift and move as if it were alive. She reached out, hesitant at first, but then more boldly, her fingers brushing against the surface. The moment her skin touched the dust, she felt it, a spark like static electricity shooting up her arm. She jerked back, eyes wide. "What does she gasp?" Heller's eyes glinted with excitement. "He felt it, didn't she?" I don't know what I felt," she admitted. "It was like nothing she'd ever experienced. A connection, brief but undeniable, as if the dust had reached out to her, testing, probing. What is this? How?" "I think," he said, his voice low and intense, "we've discovered something that could change everything." Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to uncover more of the dust creatures, as they had begun to call them. The tiny, almost invisible particles seemed to respond to human contact, shifting and pulsing with a strange kind of energy whenever anyone touched them. They were small, microscopic, even, but there was no doubt they were alive and intelligent. It wasn't too long before Heller devised a way to connect more deeply with the creature. Using a small neural interface, he was able to amplify the connection, allowing the creatures to bond with the human nervous system. It was risky, experimental at best, but Heller was too excited to wait. "I am going to try it," he announced one morning, his face alight with enthusiasm. Alina shook her head. Heller went on enough about these things. "You can just go plugging them into your brain and hope for the best." "Come on, Alina," he said, grinning. "Where's your sense of adventure?" This isn't her about adventure, she snapped at Sun about safety. We don't know what these things are capable of. I know enough. Heller shot back. I haven't run the tests. They're not dangerous, at least not in the way you were thinking. They want to connect. They need us as much as we need them. Elena's eyes narrowed. Need us for what? Heller shrugged. Who knows? But we were about to find out. Before she could stop him, he pressed the small device to his temple, activating the neural link. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, his eyes fluttered closed, and a soft smile spread across his face. I can feel them, he whispered. It's ... incredible. Elena took a step back, her heart pounding. This was wrong. She could feel it in her gut. But Heller was too far gone, too deep into his obsession to listen to reason. Over the next few hours, the changes were subtle but undeniable. Heller moved with a newfound grace, his reflexes sharper, his mind quicker. He could solve complex problems in seconds, and his strength seemed to increase tenfold. The dust creatures were enhancing him, giving him abilities beyond what any human was capable of. At first, the others were skeptical, but it didn't take long for them to follow suit. Sarah was the next to try the Neuralink, then Jacob, and soon, most of the team had bonded with the creature. Their abilities grew stronger with each passing day, and the one simple task of surviving on the harsh desert planet became effortless. Elena, however, kept her distance. She didn't trust any of it. There was something about the way the creatures moved, the way they seemed to watch, to listen. It was as if they were learning, adapting to the humans, waiting for something. And then the dreams started. It began with Sarah. She woke in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, her skin clammy with sweat. When Elena rushed to her side, the young mechanic was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. I saw something, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling in the dust. It was ... It was watching me. Elena frowned. What do you mean, what was watching you? I don't know, Sarah said, clutching her blanket tightly, but it was in my head. It felt wrong, like it was inside me. Elena's heart sank. She had known something like this would happen. The connection wasn't natural, it was dangerous. Over the next few days, more of the team began reporting similar experiences. Vivid dreams, nightmares even, where the dust creatures seemed to invade their minds, whispering strange thoughts, filling them with a sense of unease. Heller, of course, brushed it off, insisting that it was just their bodies adjusting to the bond. It's nothing to worry about, he said with a wave of his hand. The creatures are simply communicating with us. It's not part of the process. But Elena wasn't too convinced. The more she observed, the more she noticed subtle changes in the team. Their behavior became erratic, their moods shifting unpredictably. Jacob, once calm and collected, grew more aggressive, snapping at anyone who questioned him. Sarah became withdrawn, avoiding contact with the others. Even Heller, who had always been sharp and focused, began to show signs of paranoia. It was clear to Elena that the dust creatures were not as benign as they seemed. One night, as the winds howled outside their makeshift camp, Elena sat alone in the control room, reviewing the old data logs she found earlier. The previous mission to Exanthus had been small, just a handful of explorers sent to survey the planet. The logs were sparse, filled mostly with mundane details about the environment, but one entry caught her attention. We've made contact, the log read. The creatures are intelligent, far more than we anticipated. But there's something off. I fear we may have made a mistake in allowing them to bond with us. They seem to be feeding on our thoughts, our emotions. I can feel them inside my mind. I am not sure how much longer I can. The log ended abruptly. Elena's blood ran cold. She had been right all along. The creatures were feeding on them, using the connection to manipulate their mind. And if they didn't stop it soon, they would lose themselves entirely. She had to act, in fact. Elena stared at the incomplete data log, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd been right to be cautious. Whatever these creatures were, they were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Feeding on thoughts and emotions, they were using the colonists as more than just hosts. They were slowly taking over their mind. She knew she had to act quickly. If the team was already starting to show signs of the creature's influence, it wouldn't be long before they lost control completely. But convincing them to break the bond would be nearly impossible. Most of them were too far gone, especially Heller. He had become obsessed, almost zealously convinced that the dust creatures were humanity's self-future. Elena pushed back from the control panel, running a hand through her short hair. She needed a plan. If she could get Sarah on her side, maybe they could sabotage the neural links and sever the connection. But with the others so deeply entrenched, it would be dangerous, and Heller wouldn't let them go without a fight. She stood and grabbed her communicator, switching to a private channel. Sarah, it's Sully. Elena, meet me in the storage bay now. There was a brief pause before Sarah's voice crackled through the static. On my way. Elena slipped out of the control room, moving quickly and quietly down the narrow corridors of the base. The others were asleep, or at least they appeared to be in truth. Elena had no idea if they even slept anymore. Heller had been spending long hours awake, connected to the creatures, his mind drifting deeper into the bond. When Elena reached the storage bay, Sarah was already there, leaning against a stack of crates. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and haunted. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, but Elena knew it wasn't just exhaustion. The creatures were taking their toll on her and time was running out. What's going on? Sarah asked, her voice low and nervous. Why the secrecy? Elena took a deep breath. I found something: old data logs from the previous mission. The team that was here before us, they made contact with the creatures, the same way we did. But it went wrong. They lost control. Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean, lost control? The creatures, Elena explained, they were not just giving us ability. They were feeding on us, our thoughts, our emotions. The bond is deeper than we realized, and it's only going to get worse. Sarah stared at her, processing the information. So what do we do? We need to break the connection, Elena said firmly. Sever the neural links and destroy the devices. If we don't, we'll end up like the last team. Sarah looked down at the floor, her hands trembling, but Heller. He won't let us. He thinks the creatures are the key to everything. He's not going to give up that easily. I know, Elena said grimly. That's why we need to act fast before he realizes what we're doing. Are you with me? Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I am with you. Elena felt a surge of relief. Good, we'll start with the neural interfaces. We need to disable them all at once before anyone can react. Heller says the most dangerous right now, so we'll have to be careful. Together, they moved through the storage bay, gathering the tools they would need to dismantle the neural interfaces. It was risky, but it was their only option. If they didn't T-act, now they would lose their chance. As they worked, Elena's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though the others were still asleep. The creatures were everywhere in the air. In the sand, it was as if the whole planet was alive, and it knew what they were planning. Once they had everything they needed, they made their way back to the sleeping quarter. The team was scattered around the room, their bodies still, but their faces twitching slightly in their sleep. Elena knew they were connected to the creatures, even in their unconscious state. It was unsettling, the way they seemed to exist in two worlds at once. They approached Heller's bunk first. He was the biggest threat, and if they could disable his neural link before he woke up, they'd have a better chance of succeeding. Sarah crouched down next to him, her hands shaking as she reached for the interface device on his temple. Elena held her breath, watching carefully. She knew they had to move quickly, but any sudden movement could wake him. Sarah's fingers brushed the edge of the device, and for a moment, everything seemed to free. Then with a soft click, the interface detached from Heller's skin. Elena let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The moment the device was removed, Heller's eyes snapped open, wide and furious. He moved faster than Elena could react, his hand shooting out to grab Sarah's wrist, twisting it painfully. What the hell are you doing? He growled, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah yelped in pain, and Elena stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. Heller, listen to me. The creatures are controlling us. They were feeding off of us, using us. We have to stop this before it's too late. Heller, as grip tightened on Sarah's wrist, his eyes wild with anger. You don't know what you're talking about, he snarled. The creatures are helping us. They were giving us power more than we could ever imagine. You were trying to take that away from me. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the madness in his eyes, the way the bond had twisted his mind. There was no reasoning with him now. He was too far gone. Heller, please, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. This isn't to you. The creatures are manipulating you. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I don't understand what's happening. They were not controlling me. I am controlling them. I am stronger than they are. Elena glanced at Sarah, who was still struggling in his grip. They were running out of time. We don't have to do this, Elena said. Taking a step forward, let her go. We can still fix this. Heller's eyes flicked to Elena, and for a brief moment she thought he might listen. But then his expression hardened, and he threw Sarah to the ground with a snarl. You don't understand. He spat. None of you understand. The creatures are the future. They were going to make us God. Before Alina could react, Heller lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat. She barely had time to move, ducking out of the way just as his fingers grazed her skin. He was faster, stronger than he should have been. The creatures had enhanced him beyond anything she had expected. Sarah scrambled to her feet, clutching her wrist in pain. Alina, we have to get out of here. Alina nodded, her heart racing. They couldn't fight Heller, not like this. They had to retreat and come up with a new plan together. They bolted for the door, Heller saw furious shouts echoing behind them. As they ran through the narrow corridors of the base, Alina's mind raced. They had failed to disable Heller's Sciencefiction, and now he was more dangerous than ever. Worse, the creatures knew what they were planning. They were inside Heller's sound, mind feeding him power, manipulating him. They reached the control room, slamming the door shut behind them. Alina locked it, her hands shaking. Sarah leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, her face pale with fear. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Alina didn't have an answer. They were trapped, and Heller was hunting them. The only option left was to destroy the creatures at the source. But how the entire planet was covered in the dust, and they had no idea how deep the connection went. As she stared at the control panel, an idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, insanely risky, but it might be their only chance. If they could overload the power grid, they could generate an explosion large enough to destroy the surface of the planet. It would take out the creatures and the base, but it would also give them a chance to escape. Alina, Sarah asked, her voice shaky, what are you thinking? Alina turned to her, her eyes hard with determination. We were going to blow up the planet. Sarah blinked, her mouth opening in shock. You're serious? Alina nodded. It said the only way, if we don't the creatures will take over. They'll spread, and it won't just be us. They'll find a way to infect others. We can't let that happen. Sarah swallowed hard, fear etched across her face, but she didn't argue. She knew Alina was right. Together, they began working on the plan, racing against the clock as Heller's voice echoed through the base, getting closer with each passing minute. They rigged the power grid to overload, setting the timer for just long enough to give them a chance to escape. When everything was ready, Alina turned to Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest. This is it. We make a run for the shuttle and hope we get out before the planet goes up. Sarah nodded, her face pale, but determined. Let's do it. They raced through the base, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of Heller's pursuit, his voice twisted with madness. They didn't look back. By the time they reached the shuttle, the countdown had already begun. Alina punched in the launch codes, her fingers trembling as the engines roared to life. The planet beneath them trembled, the power grid beginning to overload. As they soared into the sky, the base exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. The desert planet lit up in flames, the dust creatures vaporized in an instant. Alina and Sarah sat in silence, staring out the window as the planet burned below them. They had won, but the costs had been high. Alina closed her eyes, her thoughts heavy with the weight of their victory. The creatures were gone, but the memory of what they had done would haunt her forever.